All right, in this video, we're going to work on some more JavaScript. What we're going to do is work on forms validation and submitting our form data to another page and passing data through the query string or the URL parameters. Uh, to start with, I've already created a little bit of a basic setup here just to save time in the video. I have my HTML file, and I've got a form defined with 4 text boxes and a submit button. I'm not using a submit button, an input submit. I'm actually using a button um, because we're going to want to override the default action of the form. So if I use a submit button with the form, then that's going to submit the form every time, and it's gets a little complicated to turn that behavior off. So instead of using the submit as part of the form, I'm using a button, and to do the validation, and once the button is done, then it will submit the form. So we can see what it looks like here. Very simple form, 4 text boxes, name, email, phone number, zip. So we're going to do validation on these. We're going to make sure that before the form is submitted, right now the submit button doesn't do anything when I click it. We're going to make sure that before this is submitted, that the name and the email both have data in them. We're going to validate that they have information in them. And then we're going to validate that the phone and the zip code have information in them and that they are um, and that they are of a certain that they are all numeric and of a certain length. So we're going to want it's we're going to want 5 digits in the zip code, and then of course 10 digits with the area code and the phone number. Also, I'm using a new attribute here called placeholder. So we can see uh, on the input label, I'm using an attribute here called placeholder. What this does is it gives like a little watermark onto the back of the box. So it is giving me an example of what to type in. As soon as I begin typing, the watermark goes away. But that you can use that watermark to kind of give guidance as to what you want the user to enter. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing we need to do is we need to wire up an event to the submit button so that when I click it, I'm running a JavaScript event so that I can collect and verify the text boxes. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio Code. I have a script file that's already attached. So we can go into the script file. I'm just going to create a function called validate form, and it will take no parameters. And then I'm just going to do an alert just to make sure that when we wire it up that it's there. So that's saved, come back to the index. And on the submit button, I'm going to add an attribute here called onClick, validate form. Okay. There's more than one way to add an event like this. We're adding it as an attribute in the HTML file. You can also add it with JavaScript, but for this exercise, we're just going to add it right on the form. Okay, so now this is all saved. If I go back and I refresh my page, when I click the submit survey, I get the alert. Okay, so now I know that my method, my function, my JavaScript function is wired up into the form. So what I want to do, the first thing I want to do is I want to retrieve the value of name. I want to test to make sure that that it has something in it. If it doesn't, then I want to turn this box red so that the user knows that something's wrong with the box. Okay, so let's do first things first. So first thing is let me get rid of that. First thing first, I want to retrieve the value of the text box. So let's do this. So let's say let value. And I'm going to write this as 1, and then we're going to convert it into a method because we're going to convert it into another function because we want to do this more than once, and we don't want to type a lot. So now we have let value equals, we're going to retrieve the document, get element by ID, and we see that I have an ID on the input box called name. Okay. And this is going to be name dot value. Okay. And then I want to test it to see if it has anything in it. So I'm going to use an if statement. If, and here's my Boolean condition, value not equal to blanks. I could also test the length here. I could say if value dot length equals 0, then this means that there's nothing in it. Okay, so let's try that and see if that works. So if this equals 0, then what I want to say is alert no name. Okay, again, I'm just testing here. Otherwise, we'll just continue and as we go. So now refresh that, type in survey, no name. If I type in a name here, then click the submit survey, it's working. So I'm verifying now that there is something in that value. So if the length is 0, what I want to do here is I want to change the color of the border of the text box. So the way I do that is I'm going to add a class to the text box, and then I'm going to use a style code, a style marker to um, uh, to add it. So right now we see that the text box has no class. There's no class name associated with it. So if I come back to the script, so if the text box is empty, then I'm going to say document dot get element by ID, and I'm going to get the name, and then I'm going to get the class list, which is another parameter. This is the list of all the classes that are assigned to that element. And I'm going to add a class called invalid. Okay, now let's see what that does when I come back and refresh it. Let's go ahead and inspect this box so we can look at it. We can see here that this is the box. There's no class on this box, but if I click submit, notice the class got added. Let's see that again. I'm going to refresh the box, inspect. We can see that here's the input, has a type, a name, an ID, a placeholder, um, and then the end of the element. So if I go ahead and type nothing in there and I click submit, notice the class gets added. Now it didn't change the style here because I haven't coded the style for that yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the style. So now when I come in here, I'm just going to say any element that has the invalid class. I'm just going to say border 2 pixels solid red. Okay, so add that to the style. Now when I add the class, notice the border turns red. Okay, but now the problem is that when I type it in, this is no longer invalid, so I need to take the red off. So come back here to the style and I say, so if the length of the name is 0, then I want to turn the style on. Otherwise, I want to say document.get element by ID, name dot class list dot remove. Now, if there's so the class is only going to be added once. So if the element already has the class invalid, it's not going to re-add it. It's just going to make sure that invalid is in the list. It won't add it more than once. And remove if the class name is not present, then it's not going to do anything. There's no error or anything like that. Okay, so let's refresh that again. Here it turns red. I put something in it. I click submit, and we got an error. See, we're getting an error here. So I made a mistake in my JavaScript. Get element by ID, class name dot remove. It's class list. Whoops, I misspelled. I see I have class list. See what happened there is I got an error. We can see that there's errors showing up. I go to the console and I can see the errors that are occurring. And I get the error description, document.get element by ID dot class name dot remove is not a function. That's because class name is not the property I want. It's class list. So I just mistyped. So I go back and change it to class list, and now it should work just fine. Okay, all right, so that's what we need. So now here we know that this is an error. Okay, so if we go back and run that again, here there's an error, fill that in, and everything's fine. Okay. So now we want to do this for the other fields, but we don't really want to type this over and over again. I mean, suppose we had, 10 or 12 fields. This would be a lot of duplicate code that we have here. So what we really want to do is we're going to do the same thing for every text box. We really want to have a function here. So we're going to say function um, validate is not empty. Okay. and we're going to take we're going to take the ID of the text box that we want to validate. Then I'm just going to cut this out. I'm just going to cut it and paste it down here. Then instead of using the actual literal name, I'm just going to use the ID because I'm receiving the value of the ID that I want to test in the parameter called ID. Then up here in my function, I can just call it and I can say um, validate is not empty name. Okay, so now I should be able to also do validate is not empty on the next element, which is email. Okay, so see how that is saving me a lot of typing because these lines are being replicated. So I don't need to, there's no reason for me to I don't want to type that over and over and over again. I want to use the same code as much as possible. Let's go ahead and refresh that. Let's see, I got an error. What error did I get? It's occurring at validate is not empty, JavaScript line 7. We can see it's right here. Oops, I made a big typo there. That's my uh, that's my editor trying to help me and not being that helpful. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so when I click submit, it says error, two errors, they both turn red. Okay, all right, that's good. Okay, but now what I need to be able to do is I need to be able to, I don't want to throw up an error each time. I just want to have one error at the end. So instead of alerting an error in here, what I need to do is just return whether or not this was valid, a true or false or a sentinel of some kind. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep track of all the errors. So I'm just going to say let errors equal 0. So when we first start validating, there's no errors. And then I'm just going to say errors plus equal validate is not empty on both of these. Okay. And then so now we'll know that if validate is not empty, it has no error, it will return a 0 and will not increment the number of errors found on the page. So let's see how we can do that. So instead of alerting down here in validate is not empty, if I determine that the length is 0, then that means this is an error. So what I want to do is return 1. Down here, I determine it's not an error. So what I want to do is return 0. So then here I can say if errors not equal to 0, then I can say alert, please fix errors. Okay. And we'll get a message that says fix the mistakes and then come back. Keeping my indentation clean. Okay. I misspelled errors. Refresh. Okay, submit. Please fix 2 errors. Done. So if I fix 1 here, please fix 1 error. Okay, now I click submit, there are no errors. Okay. All right, so now we've got that working. So now let's go ahead and do the validation on the phone numbers. Now here we want to validate that what we want to validate here is that they're numeric and that there is a certain length. So in this case, we have the phone, and this is going to be 10 digits, all numeric, zip code 5 digits, all numeric. Technically, we should be validating that the email has this structured email format, but that's a little cumbersome, so we're just not going to do that at this point. But if you were doing this for reals, then you would want to do that. So what we want to do is we want to write a function here that says function, and it's going to be called validate is numeric length. Okay. And then we'll take the ID of the thing we want to validate, and then what is the length that we expect it to be. So we're going to take 2 parameters. Okay. And then it's going to basically do the same logic as we had here in the validate is not empty. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say let value equals um, uh, I want to do the get element by ID, but what I want to do is I want to parse it into an integer. So I'm going to use a function here called parse int. What this is going to do is it's going to read the value from the text box and it's going to try to convert it into a numeric value. So if I type ABC, then what I'll get here is NaN. NaN is not a number. All right. Or if I type 123, then I'll get an actual numeric value here called of 123. So this parse in will help me determine if the value is numeric or not. So then we're going to say document.getElement by ID. The ID is going to be whatever's in the variable, and I'll get the value. Okay. That's the parse. Okay. So now whatever's in value is now either NaN, not a number, NaN, or it is going to be 1, 5, 10, 210, 5, 1, 5, 1, 2, whatever. So now we need to test. All right. So if is NaN, so this means, so in this case, if is NaN value, is NaN is a built-in function in JavaScript that will tell us if the value of value is NaN. That's why it says is NaN. So then, we'll test that if it's not a number, then we want to go ahead and add the invalid list to the ID. Okay, and then we also want to return 1 because we know that it's invalid. Now if it is a number, okay, then we want to come back here and we want to do another test because now we want to test the length. So now we can say we're going to have to retrieve this again because, well, actually, we won't do that. What we want to test is that the length of the value it matches length. So in this case, for the zip code, we want 5. For the phone number, we want 10. So now we'll say and I'm just going to retrieve the value again because I can't test the length of value here because it's a number and then numbers don't have a length value. So I'm just going to retrieve the value again. But I'm not going to parse it this time. If document.getElement by ID, and the ID I want is in the variable ID dot value. Now this returns a string, okay? So then I can just test the length here, length. Okay, so if that does not equal length, then let's call this something else besides length. Desired length. That way we won't get confused because we're using the same word in multiple places. Okay? So if the length of the value of the element is not equal to the desired length, then I know it's invalid. And so what I want to do is just I want to turn it red and return 1. Okay. Otherwise, if this is all good, then what I want to do is just return. Oops, I'm going to do it here. Else return 0. That means it's valid, and I want to turn the red off. So I want to remove that. Okay. All right. So let's test that. So in order to test it, we need to call something up here. So let's call errors plus equal validate is numeric length. The thing we want to validate is called phone. Okay. And the length we want to validate to is 10. Okay, so let's see if that works. Okay, so here we can say A, B, C, D. Okay, please fix 3 errors. So my 2 boxes, let's fill these in just so that we can. Okay, 1 error. It's that, and it's because it's the wrong. So now we can make it 10 characters. So first let's test numeric. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Still invalid because it's not 10. Okay. Let's put a phone number in. 210-555-1212. Okay. All right. Looks good. You saw it flipped red there real briefly. That's just the JavaScript running. So now we can try. Let's put in 10 letters and see if that works. 1, 2, 3. That's 10 letters. So that matches 10, but it's not numeric. So that should be invalid. Okay. All right, great. So if we did that, since we did that right, all we have to do now is call it for the zip code. And it should work out of the box. And it should be 5. Refresh that. And then here we get 2 errors. Oops, I missed a 5 on this. Okay. I'm just trying to test to make sure that I'm isolated the code correctly. So if I put in 5 letters, it's not going to work. If I put in only 3 digits, it's not going to work. If I put in, then it works. Okay. All right. So my validation is working. So now that we know if at the end, if errors is equal to 0, is not equal to 0, then I know there are errors. If it's equal to 0, then I know that I can go ahead and submit the form. So now what I want to do here is I want to go to the form and I want to execute an action on this form called submit. So in order to get this form in JavaScript, I need to give it an ID. Okay, and I'm just going to call it the form. And I also need to set up what the targets are. So remember on a form, if you remember when we did the exercise where we submitted to the search engines, we had to name our inputs using the name field, using the name attributes, because then we're going to get a value on the query string. And we had to have a method here. And so for the method, we want it to be get. That means we're going to put the parameters on the query string. And then we want the uh, the the other thing we need is where to submit the form to, which is called action. So the action is going to be this confirmation HTML. So I already have that kind of stubbed out. So action equals confirmation.html. Okay. If we look at confirmation.html, it's basically empty. It doesn't have anything yet. Once we get this working so that it's receiving the data, I'm just going to come in and put in a table to show the results of what we received. Okay. All right. So we've got that. We've defined the form. We've given it an ID. We said it's going to be a get method, and it's going to send to confirmation.html. Okay. So let's come back into our script here. Now what we want to do here is we want to say document.get. We're just going to get a link. We're going to get a reference to the form, and then we're just going to say submit it. Dot submit. And so this is a method, not a property. Properties are like value and class list. Those are properties. They're just information. Submit is actually a function. So here we actually have to give it the parentheses because what we're doing here is we're calling a function. We're saying get this element called the form and then call this function. This element is going to have a function called submit. So call it. Okay. So let's see what that does. So when we refresh, if we submit to please fix for errors, we come in and say Bill Neely, me at mail.com, 210-555-1212. Okay, we still have one error because I didn't fix the zip code, 78205. So now when I click submit, what should happen is this should redirect to the confirmation HTML. Let's see if we did it right. All right, we did. And notice up here on the URL, over here at the end, so we have confirmation.html, right? Here's in the address bar. So this is the link to our file. But notice here we have this thing. This is called the query string, starting at the question mark. The question mark says this is the end of the URL, and now I'm giving you the query string. These are the parameters that have been sent into this page. So the query string is a named value, is a collection of named value pairs, which means that there's more than one, and each one has a name, an equal sign, and then a value. Okay, so this is called a name value pair because it's a name and a value. So the name is on the left-hand side of the equal, the value is on the right-hand side of the equal. Notice that this says Bill plus Neely. I've typed in Bill space Neely. The plus is is being added by the browser. That's called URL encoding. You can't have blank spaces in URLs. That's invalidly constructed URL. So what it's doing is there's a methodology called URL encoding, which replaces characters that are invalid in the query string with valid characters. So we see we've got a plus sign here for the space. Over here, this %40, this is going to get replaced with the ampersand. And then if we look, the The phone and the zip code are both there. Okay. So now typically when you're writing an actual web app, this information would go back to a server somewhere and would be manipulated, but we're skipping that part because we don't have a server. So what I'm going to do now is when this page loads, what I want to do is I want to retrieve all the values off the query string, and I'm just going to build a little table here and stick the table in. So let's build the table first, and then we'll put the JavaScript in. So come back to confirmation. We'll just put another table here. I'm not going to do a header. I'm just going to do a body. And I'm going to do a couple of rows. So here this is going to be the label. And I'm going to give this a class of, I'm going to give it a class of label. And then the second element is going to be where I'm actually going to insert the value. So here I'm going to give it an ID so that I can get a reference to this element. ID equals name. I'm just going to use the same names as the input boxes in the previous form. And it's going to be empty to start with. Okay. So then I'm just gonna copy that 4 times. I'm not gonna type it because I'm lazy. So input label. So the next one is going to be email. And I'll call that email. This one is going to be phone. This one's going to be phone. The last one is zip. Okay, let's see what that looks like on my page. All right, here it is. It's really ugly. So let's style that up a little bit before we start. So what I want to do is I want to make it narrower and center it in the page. So I've got it in this div. So let's go ahead and we'll give this a class and we'll call it results. Okay. And then on over here, I'm going to style this up. So I'm going to use the same style sheet that I used for the index. So I don't want to create multiple style sheets if I don't have to. Plus, I want to be able to style things. If I have the same elements in both pages, I want to be able to style them similarly. So now let's come in and say for the results, the div itself, I want to make it let's just make it narrow. So let's make it 500 pixels. Let's start at that. Give it a margin auto, so it'll center itself. And let's go ahead and give it a little bit of a light gray background, just so we can background color light gray. Okay, let's see what that does if we style that. Okay, so now it's centered. Let's go ahead and give it some borders. So I want full borders, I want every cell to be individually bordered. So the way we do that is we say we want to put a border around each cell, okay, and around the table itself. So we'll use the border value. Okay, so we're gonna use the border value and a little bit of padding and alignment. So we can come in here and say on the results, in the results class um, for the table and for the results class for the table cells. Okay, actually, let's just do the table first, and then we'll do them one at a time so we can see how it works out. Border, let's call it 2 pixels solid black. Okay, let's put a little padding in the cell just to make it space out a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, all right, so I got that. So we can see that the table is actually not centered in the div. So because I'm only getting this border, so we'll figure that out. I also want to put the um, the border around each individual cell, not just the table. So I'm going to come back here on this for the same styling. I'm just going to apply it also to the table cells, okay, to the TDs, okay. All right, but I got this kind of uh, gaps in between. I don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is what we want to do there is we want to collapse the table. We want to collapse the border. So that's not a very intuitive that's not a very intuitive thing. But what we do here is on the results table, we're going to use the border collapse and the border collapse value, and we're going to collapse it. Now, all of this you could just go and Google. You could say, how do I put a border around every cell in the table? And it will give you this exact result. And using Google and AI tools and such to help you figure out answers to this is fine. Just don't use it to do your whole homework, right? But being able to say, how do I, how do I do verification? How do I verify that the contents of a text box is numeric? I mean, you could you could look that up, right? How do I test if a value is numeric or a length of 5, right? You could look that up. So you just don't want to use these AI tools to do all your homework for you. But if you get stuck on something, stick it in Google and see what it gives you. That's what everybody does. All right, so now let's see if okay, so now we've got that. Then we need to make the div. We need to make the table fit the entire div. So here we're going to say this should be 100% of the width of its container. And the table is inside this class, this div called class results, which I have already made 500 pixels wide. So now there we go. Okay, so now once I actually, this is a little wide, but once I actually fill this in, then it'll spread out a little bit and we'll come back and style it up. Let's go ahead and make these bold too. So all these labels, we should make them bold. So now we can say um, for all of the results, um, TD that have class um, label. I think that's what we named it, right? TD class label, okay, right here. So for everything that has TD class label, then I want to make the font weight bold. And let's go ahead and for all of the elements, let's go ahead and make the font size 18 pixels just to make it a little bigger. Okay, that's bigger. I didn't get the bold results TD. There we go. Okay. So for in the results table, anything that has the class of label, make it bold, is what this says. Select the results div, select any element that has the class of label, and make it bold. Okay, which it is. So now let's go ahead and fill in this data. So I'm going to do that with JavaScript. So I'm going to come back to my JavaScript. I'm going to use the exact same JavaScript. I'm not going to create a separate JavaScript for each page. I'm going to write a function called display results. Okay. Now, in order to read the query string, I have to use a method that's built into JavaScript, which is to get the URL, something called the URL search params. And so this is an object built into JavaScript. So here's how it works. I'm going to create a constant. So I'm defining a variable here. This variable is immutable, which means it can't be changed. That's why I'm using const as opposed to let to define it. Const means it's a constant value and we can't change. Because I'm retrieving data from the document that is immutable, i.e. unchangeable, I'm going to go ahead and define it as a constant. And then we can say params equals, and then we just have to type this in, new URL search params, and then we want to say window dot location dot search. Okay. Now in this case, you just have to know this. There's really not a lot. This is saying get the URL search params from these places, right? So don't overthink this. Just know that it's going to work. And so what's going to be in params is all of the query strings. It's going to be a set of named value pairs of the query string. The way that we will get that is we can log one to the console. So we can say, let's log to the console. Um, uh, we want to log it as to say, uh, we want to say params.get. We're going to get the value from the name. So so get, we'll look up, we're gonna give it the name and we'll return the matched value. So remember, parms is a collection, means a list, more than one set of name value pairs. So then I can say um, get the one that has zip, okay, and just log it to the console. So what this does, parms.get.zip will return the value of the zip parameter. Okay, so let's run that and see if it works. Uh-oh, didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because I didn't call the function. So I got the function, I called it display results, but I didn't wire it to the page in any way. So where can I wire this to the page? Well, the easiest place is once the page is finished loading, then run the function. So there's a handy built-in function on the body tag called onLoad. This says once the body has been loaded, then do this. So I'm going to say, I'm going to call my function right here, display results. Okay, saved, run, still didn't get it. Okay, why is it not working? Oh, it's because of logging into the console. Duh. Okay, so here's the 78205. Okay. All right, so now we know that it's working. So we see it on the 78205 his heroes, the zip up here on the top. And so now it's being loaded to the console. I'm sorry, I was expecting it to already be on the table, but it's not. It's in the console. Okay, so now instead of putting it in the console, we need to insert it into the appropriate place in the table. So we do that by saying instead of console.log, we're going to use our get element by ID, document.get element by ID. The element we want is going to be zip, because remember we named on the confirmation, we named the table cell using the same name as the parameter. And then we want to change the inner HTML because we remember we use value for a text box. That's an attribute of the text box. But in this case, we're getting a container element, a TD. And so we want to change the inner HTML. And we're going to just set it to parms.get zip. Okay, let's see if that works. All right, perfect. Okay, so now we can get rid of the console log because we don't need that. But then we should really write a function here, right? Because I'm going to want to do this. I'm going to want to do these two lines a bunch of times, right? Um, uh, so we could write a function. Actually, I don't know the right function. We'll just cut and paste this. Okay, so we'll do name. It's only one line. It's not really duplicating. Then we're going to get the email. Now you don't have to name these the same way, but with the same name, I just did because it's easy. Zip. Okay, so now let's load it. There we go. But let's instead of centering it, let's make everything left justified. So in the table, let's go back to our style. In the table right here with the collapse with the TDs. Let's go ahead and text align this. I think it'll work here. Text align. Oh, I need a semicolon. Text align left, I think it's called. Yeah, let's see. Yep. Okay. All right. So there we go. Okay. So now let's test the whole thing. So come back here to our, please complete the survey. Let's see. Okay. All right. So that works great. So now what we've learned is how to do forms validation. So we did form validation on these text boxes to make sure that they were not empty. We did forms validation on these input boxes to make sure that they were numeric and of a certain length. We highlighted the border of the box. We indicated there was an error, highlighted the border of the box to show the user which one was an error. And we did that using a button. And then once the button was, we did that using a button, not the built-in form submission logic, but we used a button in JavaScript. And then once the button once the form is, um, Once the form is complete, then we use the form.submit function to actually submit it to the confirmation page. And once we get to the confirmation page, we use JavaScript to pull the data out of our query string and populate fields on our table. All right, I hope that was helpful.